to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Now that it's 2022, we're just months away from the golden anniversary of the 72 Summit Series between Team Canada and Team Russia.
If you had been writing the script, it couldn't have produced a more dramatic and exciting final. Tonight we are making hockey history, and the teams and fans are really up for this one.
Well, Foster, it's no longer an 8-game series. It's down to a 1-game series.
We've invited our buddy Sean Mitten, co-author of The Goal That United Canada, 72 Amazing Stories by Canadians from Coast to Coast. Sean, you approached a well-covered topic, but in a fresh angle. Tell us what that was and what the inspiration was.
Sure. You know, when I think about the 72 series and specifically the Paul Henderson goal, one of the things I kept thinking about was it was this incredible collective moment. And being a Canadian now living in the U.S., you think about those memories or moments in a country's history where they all remember where they were when something important happened. And, unfortunately, in the U.S., you think about things like maybe 9/11 or Martin Luther King getting shot. And, in Canada, they had this great positive memory, which was the Paul Henderson goal. And so, when I brought Paul down to speak around 2010, it was really fascinating, around the 40th anniversary mark to see people still think about, those memories and they could think about them crystal clear with emotion. And I just thought it would be a great idea, especially after, we heard the sad news and at that time that Paul was diagnosed with cancer. And, really wanted these stories to continue and to think about it on a nationalistic level. And so I really envisioned hearing people's memories from Victoria to Newfoundland and being able to share these with younger generations. And that was really how the Goal That United Canada kind of came together.
With the event that was decades old, how did you go about finding people, and how tough was that? And what about making sure their memories were fresh enough to tell stories?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing I did was, I thought about who the target market of who had all those stories. And, certainly it revolved around baby boomers. And so what I tried to do was to go to many, baby boomer related type of events, both in the US and in Canada. And what I would do is typically set up a table and, talk to people and look to gather stories. And I remember one of those locations I went to was in Florida, and they had this tremendous snowbird type event of Canadians who were, spending the winters in Florida. And, I'll never forget, one of the people who came up to the booth that time was former referee Bruce Hood. And, he shared his story of watching the game in his basement with his son and how happy they were jumping up and down. But what I found from that experience was I estimated that, when I asked people their memories, probably around 70% of people had a pretty good idea where they were. And you can see in their eyes that they could kind of visualize that. And that's when I knew that, we could pull enough stories together to get 72 quality stories. And Glenn, I'd probably say I collected over 200 stories during that period.
Among the many stories, because there's 72, one is from Johnny Bauer. Tell us about his entry.
Yeah, Johnny was great. I mean, just a wonderful man in general. But at that time, back in 1972, he had only been retired for a couple of years, and his job at that time was as a scout for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And at that time, he was in Vancouver. And as he told it, he had just arrived in the hotel. He knew the game was on. He wanted to get settled and then come down and watch the game. And so he had missed part of the game, but he got there more than enough time to watch the Henderson goal. And it was funny. So Henderson scores, and everybody goes nuts. And they see Johnny Bower, and people acknowledge and know Johnny. So he said, I signed a bunch of autographs. And one guy came up to him and said, "Johnny, why aren't you playing?" And Johnny, again, probably being about 45 at that time, said, "Guys, I'm too young for this." So Johnny just got a tremendous sense of humor. And, I thought that was wonderful. But, he went on to say that to him, Paul Henderson was just such a wonderful teammate. And not only was he a good hockey player when he came over from Detroit over to Toronto because they really needed goal scorers, but the other thing that he strongly pointed out was that Paul was really good in the locker room. And when you had a young team, not all the young guys tended to speak up as much. And Paul really filled a role of, articulating things in the dressing room and being that energy guy. And, Johnny spoke very highly of Paul.
Let's continue with Paul Henderson, because one of the unique things of the book is that both Paul and Eleanor, his wife, get chapters in the book. What was the inspiration of having them both tell their stories?
Yeah, I'd interviewed Paul a few times, and I, in all honesty, I didn't want to make the book as much about all these stories coming from Paul because I wanted to be people across Canada and really have, everybody from, the common person in Ontario or Newfoundland to notable people like, the guys from Blue Rodeo or Peter Mansbridge or Fred Fox as examples. And so, but when I talked to Paul, there was one story that just stood out so much that I had to make it the first story in the book. And that was the goal that saved a marriage. And Paul, speaks of that so energetically because him and Eleanor did a lot of counseling or a lot of speaking to married couples across Canada. And so, the essence of the story was that this couple were going to sign the divorce papers the day of the game. And, it's the third period. They're losing 5-3. And the husband just said, "Listen, can we wait till the game's over?" They score one goal. It was, Esposito, and then Cornway ties it up, and they're starting to warm up and, cheer as proud Canadians. And then Henderson scores with 34 seconds left, and they embrace, and they realized right then that they still loved each other, and that that day they weren't going to sign the divorce papers, and they never did. And so, at Christmas time, this lady had sent Paul a Christmas card and said, "Thank you for giving me the greatest gift anybody could give me, and you saved my marriage by scoring that goal."
Wow.
So
that's cool. So Eleanor's entry, was that about the same thing?
Yeah. So during that time, I thought, I was really exploring about some of the folks who had gone to Moscow and just really tried to understand what their experience was like. And I said to Paul, I said, do you think Eleanor would talk to me and share some memories? And he said, "Well, you just got to call her and ask yourself." So sure enough, Eleanor, she said that'd be great. So went over to their house, and, I'll never forget, I'm sitting on the couch with Eleanor, and we're about to have this conversation. And she says, "Sean, I don't know what I'm going to remember. It's like 40 years ago. Like that's a long time ago." So, we started off very gradually, and about 30 or 40 minutes later, we finished our interview. And I think as we got cooking in it, it just brought back so many more memories, and it was just so fantastic. And you could see the look and the feel in her eyes of having those memories. And, one of those specifically that I'll never forget was after Henderson scored the goal, they were supposed to go over to a reception. So they're in a bus, and it's just, Eleanor and Paul sitting next to each other. And she said, we went from the arena over to the reception. And she said, we didn't say one word through the whole trip. And they were just so emotionally exhausted that she was just really saying that we were just so spent, and it was just quite an experience. But that feeling and the serenity and the quietness was remarkable.
Wonderful story. Sean, I'm going to ask you to hang on because we have another guest that we need to get on while he has a few minutes, and then we'll return to your story and the book because we have a lot more to discuss. But right now, I'd like to welcome to Hockey Time Machine Randy Gregg. Randy, thank you so much for making the time. I know you're busy, but I appreciate you making a few minutes for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been a great hockey experience, and early on, it was an unbelievable experience to go to Moscow and enjoy the '72 series for sure.
Well, Randy, I don't know if you ever made anything of yourself in your adult life, but at least you got to be in the stands in '72 in Moscow at the tender age of 16. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting. My older brother, who was 7 years older, was a big hockey fan. He used to take me all to my games when I was young, and we used to go watch the Edmonton Oil Kings, which was a junior hockey team many years ago. And he was the one who said, we should really go there. It costs an amazing amount of money to go to Moscow. I think $700 for an all-inclusive 2-week trip to Moscow. And he was really the impetus behind it. I was 16 at the time. I was just going to the University of Alberta my first year, and as you well know, of course, the series was in September, so it wasn't a great time for anybody to miss the first 3 weeks of your first year university. In any case, I blame my brother for all the misgivings that I had at university and all the difficult times I had because I missed the first 3 weeks. In any case, it was such a fantastic opportunity, and we were able to get over there at 16. It was a little bit different experience. Every meal we had, we stayed at the Hotel Ukraine. There was a bottle of vodka and a bottle of champagne. And at 16, I wasn't much of a drinker and never have been since. But if you had to have something, you had to have vodka or champagne. It was really the first time, and first time I've gone to Moscow and Russia many times since. But what a great experience to see Russia in 1972. We'll never see it again like that.
What other memories do you have of being at the games or even your time generally in Russia?
Well, as you all may imagine, a lot of the people that went there were older people. I think my brother and I were two of the youngest. So when they went on the trips, the sightseeing trips, our interest wasn't really in sightseeing. Our interest was to go out into the community, see what Russia was all about as much as we could. We were fortunate enough to meet two young girls outside of the Red Square, and they were a really pleasant young ladies who spoke English. So they became our tour guides. So we spent a lot of time with them, seeing what Moscow was really like, and really, experiencing the culture from inside rather than from a guest standpoint. It was an amazing time to watch the hockey. I can remember exactly where I was sitting in the last game when Henderson did score a goal, and we also realized though that as much as the people back in Canada thought this was a wonderful time, we also realized that there were a lot of things that went on that the Russian people just didn't understand. Alan Eagleson being pulled across the ice, the taunting and so forth that would happen with Eagleson and his crew. And so, to be very honest with you, many of us weren't as proud to be Canadians as I thought I would be. At 16, I even realized that I'd look around in the stands and see these Russians kind of shaking their head, wondering what's going on with these Canadians. And so, although we were very, very proud that our team won and Paul Henderson scored the amazing goal, and to be there to be part of history, um, sometimes winning is more important when you have some integrity and discipline and things like that. And I think that wasn't part of what we saw in the stands in Luzhniki Stadium.
When did the enormity, the historical importance of the series, when did you become aware of that? I doubt it was at the time. Was it years later, or did you have some idea how big this was back at home?
Yeah, it's a really good comment because I think a lot of us realize that, of course, the NHL players were miles ahead of every other hockey organization in the world. In the first game in Winnipeg, people started to get their eye open to say these Russians are pretty good. In fact, I think after 1972, we realized that there were many great organizations across the world in hockey. And for me, the luxury of being able to play in the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid against those same Russians was a really special time. I had 8 years to prepare both physically, mentally, but also to realize what an experience it was for the Russians, the Russian fans. We were sitting in the middle of them to see how important it was for the Russians to dominate international hockey. So it gave us a lot of impetus to do our best to beat them in the Olympic Games. And then, of course, back in 1988, playing in the Olympics and playing in that same Luzhniki Stadium against the Russians, it's a kind of a fun experience to kind of go full circle, not only as a young fan, but then as a player for Canada in Russia.
I kidded you, Randy, but you've led so many successful lives that I suspect you have a closet full of Randy Gregg clones, because I don't really know how one person could do this all. As you mentioned, you were an Olympian, a Stanley Cup winner, an orthopedic doctor, a managing director of a baseball team, and not least of all, a proud husband and father. So let's tackle that 1980 Olympics first, where you were team captain. You might not have won gold, but you came back eventually with something better.
Much better, as a matter of fact, although I would have liked to get a gold medal. The experience I had with Father David Bauer, who was the real creator of the national program, was such an amazing experience. He really molded our perspective and attitude towards participation. In the NHL is fairly straightforward. You win, you're good. You lose, you're bad, and that's what professional sports all about. But in the Olympics, it's a little bit different. And Father Bauer really wanted to make sure that the players that were on that team became better citizens. They became better fathers, better professionals in their community. And so I really look back on a sixth place finish in the 1980 Olympics as the highlight of my career. Now, you talk about a slightly different highlight. I happened to meet this beautiful little blonde-haired Winnipeg speed skater who ended up being the mother of my four children, and so that was the absolute highlight. My gold medal in the Olympic Games, and in fact, not only had she been to a couple of Olympics, two of our kids have also gone to a few Olympics. They picked speed skating over hockey, which I was very happy about. They really understand the importance of the Olympic Games and international competition without getting paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think that brings the beauty of international sport to the forefront.
Yes, you've said you were glad your kids got your wife's speed on skates and not yours, right?
They never would have gone to the Olympics with my speed, that's for sure. But I think maybe they got my stubbornness, so that was good. My wife's a wonderful person, but sometimes, if you want to beat the best, and when you're 20 years old, you're going into Luzhniki Stadium to try to beat the best team in the history of hockey, internationally at least. You have to have the confidence and the grit and maybe the stubbornness to say, you may be better on paper, but we're going to give you a good run for the money.
It's also been important to you and Kathy not to be the typical sports parents. So tell us about that.
Well, yeah, I certainly agree with you. My parents were hardworking business people and mothers, and they would just support me. And whether we won or lost, it didn't really matter. Of course, they wanted their child to win. Who wouldn't? That's the nature of sport. But I can remember when my two boys, who are now 35 and 34, they were 5 and 6 years old, and we used to go down in the basement of our house and play floor hockey. And the oldest one, Jamie, would say, "Dad, I want to be Mark Messier." I think he'd not met Mark before, but liked the name. And my younger one, Ryan, would say, "I want to be Jeff Bukaboom," and because he didn't know who Jeff Bukaboom was, but liked the name. And then they look at me and say, "Dad, who do you want to be?" And they were identified that Dad probably went to the hockey rink, but they weren't sure whether I was a janitor or a hockey player. And it's exactly the way we wanted. We wanted our children to grow up as individuals and not as somebody's son. And fortunately, they've grown into wonderful young men and women, and we're really proud of them. But I think that's more the perspective that and my wife Kathy, being to a couple of Olympics, she wasn't enamored by the fact that I played in the NHL. In fact, she wanted me to quit long before I ever did. Unfortunately, we kept on winning those Stanley Cups, so it was hard to quit on the Edmonton Oilers when during those years. She would be just as happy to have somebody sit at home and be a good father, and that's why I think our perspective towards our child rearing was kind of a positive one.
And you had a daughter who wore a Trevor Linden sweater. Wasn't anybody a Randy Gregg fan in your house?
Not too much. They were a dad fan, but we wanted them to be excited about all kinds of things. I know my son came out. We flew him out. It's hard to believe. He was 6 years old. I was playing in Vancouver at the end of my career. We flew him out by himself. I picked him up at the airport. He was 6 years old. And Trevor had us over to his hot tub in Vancouver. And so he immediately became number 16 fan, Trevor Linden. I was number 21 in my career. And so it's good. Trevor's a wonderful gentleman. And really to have our young children exposed to these great people was something else. But I got to tell you one thing, and I think it's maybe reflective on what hockey can do for people. There was only one person in my life that I wanted my boys to meet personally. And, I was with some amazing people, Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky, some great, great players. And it was Father Bauer. Father Bauer was in Edmonton and my kids were young, but I said, Father, if you don't mind, I just really love to have you meet my young men because they were only probably 6 or 7 years old, but I wanted them when they were older to know that they met one of the most influential individuals in the history of hockey in Canada.
Thank you for that. You mentioned your international resume, which includes coaching in Japan and the 1980 Olympics, and then a Canada Cup, and then close to home in Calgary in '88, another Winter Olympics. What does it mean to you to have worn your country's sweater, much as you saw as a teenager Team Canada do in '72?
At age 16, sitting in the northwest corner of Luzhniki Stadium, surrounded by Russian people that were all dressed in gray and black, because at that point in time there was no such thing as colors and personality and individualism in Russia. I was too young to realize how that would influence me. At no time would I ever think, boy, would I love to be down there, because these were the amazing NHL stars. These are the greatest Russian players in the history of hockey. And so I don't think I was cocky enough to think that I would get there. Luckily, I was able to start playing with the University of Alberta Golden Bears under a great coach, Claire Drake. And I think with the tutelage of people like Claire Drake and Father Bauer, I was able to become an adequate hockey player. And so, of course, during those times, to think back and say, sure, the Stanley Cup is great, but the Stanley Cup is a business. It's that's your job. You have to win it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoyed that experience for sure. But to be able to go to Stockholm or to Tokyo or to Moscow and play internationally, it sounds very cliche-ish that I'm wearing that flag on my chest, but when you are in the middle of Moscow with 19 of your teammates against 20 great hockey players and another 18,000 fans that hate you, there's a bonding experience. And so I talk to my children a lot about the amazing experience it is to represent your country. And fortunately, two of them were able to go on and represent their country in the Olympics as well.
And you're not just talking the talk. Back in '80, you had a chance, I believe, to sign with the New York Rangers and turn that down so you could play in the Olympics with Father Bauer's team.
Well, I sure did. Yeah, It was interesting because we had a group of young fellows who wanted to buy this amateur baseball team in Edmonton, and it was at my house. And the phone rang, and it was it was an agent in New York who said, "Gee, the New York Rangers want to offer you." And at that point, it was about a $600,000 contract for 4 years, which back then was amazing. I was going from uh, being a medical student to now having this opportunity to sign the contract. And I said, no, you know what? Thanks for that, but I really want to go to the Olympic Games, and the experience there, much like the experience that our fans had going to uh, in Moscow in 1972, really changed our focus. And I realized with my background in medicine that I won't do things just for the money. I'll take care of my family well enough being a doctor. What I really wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that the hockey experience I had was an ultimate, an ultimate experience, and certainly the exposure in Tokyo and the chance to travel the world and play hockey against some of the best amateur players in the world was just that.
It's crazy. We've gone this far in the interview without, except for you tangentially mentioning that you're a 5-time Stanley Cup champion. And I know you've answered this question probably 1,000 times with the Oilers, but Here's 1,001. So what was it like being a defenseman on those teams? Because when Curry and Messier and Gretzky and Coffey went down the ice and they didn't score, sometimes it was just you and the goalie manning the fort. So tell me about that.
Well, and sometimes that did happen, but that goalie tended to be Grant Fuhr, who's a Hall of Famer. So Grant did a good job taking care of the rest of us for sure. It was an interesting transition. When I got there, I came to the team after being in Tokyo for 2 years, and Glenn Sather introduced me to the team and said, "Guys, don't worry about him. He's not taking your job. We're going to play Los Angeles in the playoffs. He's just going to be here for next year." And so in the first game, we actually lost to Los Angeles. And all of a sudden, Glenn came to me and said, "Randy, you're going to play." And the week before, I'd been in Tokyo, and I replaced a fellow who was struggling at that time. He wasn't a bad hockey player. I think his name was Coffee or something like that, a Hall of Famer. So anyway, Paul sat out, and here I was playing. That was the Miracle on Manchester. And I was the one that sat for, I had a 5-minute misconduct with Charlie Simmer after a fight. And we sat there. I went into the penalty box. It was 5-0 for us. I came out, it was 5-5, and they ended up winning and beating us. During that time, I could see that, goals and offensive performance were really important. The next year, we got to the Stanley Cup Finals against the New York Islanders, and I think that was the year when Wayne had scored 92 goals, more than anybody in the history of hockey. But the New York Islanders were a better team. We had amazing players. Not me. I was a very adequate player, I guess, but not great. But we had Wayne and Mark Messier and Yari Curry and Paul and all those great players. But we didn't have a better team. And so it was really interesting to see how at the end of that time, when we were beaten soundly by a better New York Islander team, everyone looked in the mirror. And as you well know, there's a tradition when you play in the Stanley Cup that you have a beard. And so we'd have these great big awful beards. My wife didn't kiss me, I think, for 3 months there. I probably wouldn't have kissed myself either. So at the end of the series, you sit in the mirror and you shave off your beard. I can't remember what I did yesterday, but I can remember like it was yesterday, sitting looking in the mirror, wondering how are we going to beat such an amazing team like the New York Islanders. Then I looked down the way and everybody was doing the same thing. Well, all of a sudden we realized that if we were going to accomplish the great goal of being a Stanley Cup champion once in our life, that we would have to start looking at team play, mid-ice zone transition, good defensive positioning. And so it became easier for us as a defensive defenseman to get some support. But believe me, I would have never, ever traded somebody like Wayne Gretzky or Mark for their amazing offensive talents. They were spectacular in it. So many times, even during the practice, they look at each other and say, "How did we do that?" They amazed themselves. They were so good. So we had a nice combination. But to win a Stanley Cup is not easy, and we were fortunate enough to have 5 opportunities to do that because there was a total team focus.
Listening to you describe that, it sounds like maybe there is something to that old sports chestnut that teams have to lose before they learn how to win.
Absolutely. My first year, there were 2 rookies, myself and a rookie named Yaroslav Pozar. Yaroslav was from the Czechoslovakian national team, had played against the Russians numerous times, and he became my roommate. My job was to teach Yaroslav English, and Yaroslav was a big bear of a man. And yet, of course, he was Czech, so who cared about him? He was no good. We had all these great players. But then the players started to realize that Yaroslav Pozar was not only a great man, but he was also a great player. And at the end of that one series where we lost to the New York Islanders, Yaroslav Pozar, in his halting English that I didn't teach him particularly well, got up and he looked at the Wayne Gretzky's in our dressing room and said, "Guys, if you want to win, you have to play as a team. You have to play defense and you have to play offense." And I thought, here's this rookie. He's 32 years old at the time, had played in 2 or 3 Olympics, telling these amazing future Hall of Famers that if you really want to win, this is the way to do it. So Yaroslav was a big part of our team. He may have scored 10 or 12 goals, but that focus to our great, great players that in fact scoring 92 goals isn't enough. And Wayne was lucky enough to get 4 Stanley Cup rings, Mark 6. And so it is interesting. You do have to lose to be able to understand what you have to do to win.
You alluded to during your playing career that you contemplated retiring on several occasions. And in fact, a couple of times you actually did retire before coming back to the game. So I wondered if you would share with us these competing poles that you wrestled with, medicine on one side and hockey on the other.
Yeah, and let's add family as well. It was medicine I knew was going to be there, and it was a passion of mine. I remember coming back from Tokyo, and in fact, I had an interesting experience my second year. I was in Sapporo in the northern island of Hokkaido, and the phone rang in my hotel room, and it was Glenn Sather. Glenn Sather and Peter Pawkinson from the Oilers had flown over for some of Peter's businesses in Tokyo, but found out where I was and said, "We want to sign you. So when you come back to Edmonton, let's talk." So I got back to Edmonton and went up to Glenn's office, and Glenn made me an offer that was amazingly higher than I'd ever consider. And of course, as an Edmontonian, would love to play in Edmonton. But I thought, this is the opportunity to make a bit of a statement. And so I said, Glenn, I really appreciate your offer, but I think I'm going to go back to medicine. So I got up and I started walking out the door. So Glenn said, "Randy, sit down." And then the offer went up by another $50,000 or something like that. It wasn't a negotiating ploy, what it was. And I did that one more time. Finally, I said, geez, if I do that again, he might not call me back. I might just walk out and have a chance to play with this great Oiler team. But I think what it did was, well, not financially, it didn't matter not. What it is it told Glenn and the organization that if you don't like me, just tell me. I'll go somewhere else. I have something else. And so I was never sent to the minors. I was never yelled at or screamed at, even though I probably deserved to be. And so I think the relationship between the coaching staff and me worked out well, because I really wasn't that great a player, and I could have been on the bubble to go to the minors. And don't send me to the minors. Just tell me to quit, and I'll quit and get on with medicine. So I think when we talk to young people, having all our eggs in one basket is a detriment in many ways. And to be able to have, whether it's education or other interests, really makes you a more well-rounded person, and also obviously have some advantages when it comes to negotiation. My wife, on the other hand, wanted me to play for 2 years and then quit and get on with life. But again, that second year was our first year of the Stanley Cup Championship, so it was a hard one to turn around.
Well, it's better than having her say, yeah, yeah, you keep playing. Is more time away is fine. I don't really miss you. So, it's a compliment.
Well, I think it is, and also it's a compliment to her, because I think a lot of wives, unfortunately, their life becomes entangled with this professional hockey environment, and so they really do want their husband to keep on playing, because they like going to the all the events, and they love going to the games, and they love being a celebrity. My wife wasn't like that. She'd already been to a couple of them. She didn't care whether I was a good athlete or not. She wanted a husband to be back to spend time with our kids. So it was an easier situation for me when I did decide to retire for the third time, that I could get on with life and not having a wife who said, "Gee, I wish I could go to another game." I don't think we've been to a game since I retired, which is okay. We got lots of things to do.
Today, your specialty, I believe, is treating sports related injuries. But, doctor, as a defenseman, you're cross checking people, you're plastering them into the glass. So, what about the Hippocratic Oath, Randy?
Well, first of all, if you remember that I wasn't the most physically dominating person. I wasn't going to fight anybody and beat them badly. I wasn't going to intimidate them. I think the skill that I brought to the game was positioning, was understanding the game better. Again, I look at Claire Drake and think about all the practice time we had. And my NHL career was almost exclusively due to the skills that I learned from Claire Drake. So sometimes you don't have to cross-check people when you're in the right position. You don't have to fight them if you're not a fighter. The first year, of course, you have to fight to make sure that people know you're not going to back down. But really, my goal was to get the puck and get it up to the big guys who could score the goals. And so I think I filled a niche in our team that was needed. But when the people came to watch the games, they came to watch Paul Coffey and Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier. And yeah, I had to play when they got a little bit tired. But I'm okay with that too. Not every team has to have 20 superstars. They have to have the sluggers that get out there and do the job in the corner. And we were real happy to do that. I think of a fellow named Grant Fuhr, who was just a fabulous, fabulous person. We'd make so many mistakes, they'd score on him, and Grant would never point fingers because he realized that, we had to have two defensemen, we had to have three forwards to make him the Hall of Fame goalie he was. And so it was really a nice experience to be with these players that were so good and yet realized the team environment was what, you talk about the 1972 Russian team. I mean, I played with some of them in the NHL later on, and I mean they would have 10 months straight practice. They wouldn't see their wives for 10 months of the year. The Russian national team was an amazing team, but there was a large price to be paid. Igor Larionov would tell us stories about how this was after 1972, how the trainer would come around with pills and you just took a pill, likely anabolic steroids, I would think, to strengthen them up. And Igor, who was about 5'6", 150 pounds, an amazing center iceman, took the pill. He told me he put it in his mouth, and when the trainer turned around, he'd spit the pill out and never take it. Igor didn't need to be 180 pounds. He needed to be this amazing playmaker that he was. So, the Russians, it was hard for them, and it was really nice during the 1980s for a lot of the great players to be able to come over and join the NHL because it showed not only their skills but also the commitment they made to that Russian national team.
I wasn't originally going to ask you this, but since you played with and against Russian players of that era, they had a reputation for being grim. But the way you describe what they had to go through, it's not surprising, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. Grim is, I mean, that would be a compliment for what they would do. If we asked any of our NHL players to do what the Russians were asked in the early 70s, they'd all retire. They'd all boycott. They would go on strike. There was no options for them then. But I remember when I was playing in Tokyo, we had Liapkin and Shadrin, two players that were on the national team in 1972. I got to play against them when I was in Tokyo. Wonderful guys, just really good-hearted and so forth. But they were beaten down. I mean, they had a five-man unit, and Liapkin would get the puck in the corner, and he would absolutely know where Shadrin was. It was tape to tape, pass every time. But for 10 months a year, for 8 years, with five-man units, that defense partner was with the three-man forward line. I mean, if somebody said sneeze, the other person sneezed. That's just the way they grew up. And so I think it was effective, but there was a cost to that. And it was really nice to see these great players get a chance not only to show the world how good they were, but also to make a little bit of money so when they did go back to Russia, they could live a good life.
Sitting in the stands at 16, you and nobody else in that arena could have possibly imagined how many Russians in the decades to follow would have their name engraved on the Stanley Cup. In that sense, what a different and better world we live in now.
Well, if making money is a better world, you have to pay the bills. I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of money and they're not particularly happy with their life. One thing I should mention, and of course, this is something that I don't know whether I should, but I think it's a poignant comment. Um, when we won the game, when Canada won the eighth game to win the series, my brother and I went back to the Hotel Ukraine. Of course, they gave us a little bit of champagne and vodka, so we were both feeling a little bit good. And we went back to our hotel lobby area, and we were on, I think, the 11th floor. And in that particular hotel, there was a family that would stay in each of the floors of the hotel, and that the mother, of course, would do your beds, and everybody else would have a job. And of course, this lady who was on our floor probably wouldn't know hockey stick from a basketball. And we walked in. Of course, we were excited because Canadians won, and we came to her and we said, Canada, da, Russia, yet. And we were so excited that we had won. And she looked us in the eyes, and this lady probably never seen a hockey game before, but had obviously seen this game, the eighth game from Canada and Russia on TV. And she looked at me and she went with her hockey stick like this: Canada, this, Russian, yet. And so I thought, I'm 16 years old. This lady's 45 years old, had watched the most important game of international hockey in the history of the game. And she identified that our players were more aggressive than she had wanted, that the Russians were tactically and technically stronger. And of course, we hear the stories of the Russians hitting the back of the skates. I was proud of the greatness of our players, but I'm not so sure I was proud of Alan Eagleson. Alan and I go back a long time, and we're not on each other's Christmas list for good reason. Um, I think there's better ways of showing off the beauty of Canada and Canadians than boycotting and running across the ice. It was a disappointing time in a very amazingly great hockey experience.
I thank you very much for sharing that. So let's close on something more fun, which is about something that definitely isn't done for money. And it relates back to a quote of yours that I found surprising, where you said, I was probably a better baseball player than a hockey player. And these days, you are finding a way to apply your passion for baseball. So please tell us about that.
Well, my older brother's a wonderful gentleman, and anything I wanted to do, he would be there to coach hockey, coach baseball, and baseball was a passion. I was a really fairly decent hitter. The problem was, of course, in Canada, if you want to become a Major League Baseball player, you have to go to the United States. And so by the time I had the opportunity to get a scholarship in the States, I was already in medical school. So I thought, well, I should probably not give up medical school. Why don't I try some other sport? Maybe hockey. We can do that here in Edmonton. And so that worked out well. But my passion for the game of baseball has not waned. And I really like the idea of giving our young Canadian ball players a chance to get a really good experience at every age so that they can go down to the United States. They can stay here in Canada. There's some good college programs and give them a chance to be the best they can be. Now, if that's Bantam double C, I'm okay with that. And if it's Los Angeles Dodgers, I'm okay with that too. But I think what we want to do, whether it's our children or other children in the community, is give them the opportunity to be the best they can be. And I think we all sleep well at night knowing that we can do that for people.
Randy, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. Please thank Kathy for me for making you a half hour later coming home, and that she shared all your insights and all the memories starting from 1972 up until what you're doing today and all the success you've had and with your happy family and your kids. Even if they are living in Calgary, are they still in Calgary?
You know what? It's funny with the mother like Kathy, they all said, "Yeah, I think I'm coming back home." So they all live right near us, but one of my sons had the audacity to buy a house a 7-minute bike ride from my house. I don't know why I have to ride my bike 7 minutes to go visit my grandchildren, but it is what it is. We'll accept that.
Hardships, hardships. Dr. Greg, many, many thanks. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure, and we appreciate you doing this also on short notice. Thanks again.
It was my pleasure, and it's great to be able to share with Canadians a really amazing, iconic time in Canadian hockey.
Okay, thank you so much. Good night,
Good
Randy.
night.
Okay, now if we can ask the indulgence of Sean to stand by yet a few more minutes. I want to bring on, oh, Randy's still here, and we promised we'd make him go away. There's Kathy St. Germain.
Hello.
There's only a few people from Canada who can say they saw the Summit Series in Moscow in person. And one of those is Kathy St. Germain. But Kathy, you are way, way too young to have gone to Russia in 72. Are you sure you were really there?
I was 21.
Well, okay, we'll take your word for it.
Thank you.
But how did you end up being at those games? What was the process of you deciding, I want to go, and then actually going?
There is no question I had watched hockey all my life. I had 7 brothers. So when hockey night in Canada came on TV, there were 7 boys and 3 girls in my family. So guess who won? And so it just kind of grew on me, and I really started to enjoy watching hockey. I'd even go out to the rink at night and play outside. And my brothers would come. Some of them were younger, and some were older. And we'd play for most of the night and then come back home. It just got to be a habit. And when Team Canada 72 was formed, I just thought this is the best lineup I'll ever see. So I decided to go, and then I had to find who was selling the tickets, and then disappointing news, they were all sold out. I'd never get a ticket, they told me. They put me on the waiting list, and I called every day, called the travel agency every day, bugged them. So finally, I think it was June, they said, we're going to give you tickets. We have extra tickets coming from Ottawa, and we're going to give you two of them. So, so lucky. I was so lucky. And then it happened. And I remember going to Russia, it was unreal. It was so surreal. And then watching the games, meeting the people, they were wonderful. I loved the Russian people. And the sightseeing, I remember the one thing I didn't really enjoy was seeing Lenin's tomb. We had to wait outside for so long. And then when we got in, it was very uncomfortable. And I didn't see the point, but we did that. And then I didn't really enjoy the food, but it was a wonderful experience. I'll never forget it.
Let me take you back a step. By the time you arrived in Russia, Canada was down 2-1 with one tie. Were you and your fellow travelers wondering, why did we spend our rubles on this?
No, we never thought that. We always knew that Canada could come back. I never thought we wouldn't win. I mean, it was a nail biter at times, but we always had faith in our team. I mean, this was the best hockey team in the world, in my opinion. So, no, looking at these people.
Was that a feeling shared by the others in your group? Did your optimism never waver?
It was. And I remember I was outside one day and Ken Dryden came over and he said, if you could get all the people behind us and cheer as loud as you can, that would really help us. I said, no problem. I will. He probably mentioned this to a lot of people, but it was like, oh, I can't wait. Of course we'll cheer loud. We did, and they won.
You mentioned some of the sightseeing that you did. What were your impressions of Moscow? I imagine this was your first time there. What impression did you come away with about the city and about the people?
I thought the city was so beautiful. St. Basil's Cathedral and just the whole city. I'm losing my mind here, forgetting, but you're showing me these pictures, like all of that. Oh, wonderful. Walking the streets and meeting the people. It was something I'll never forget. I've always wanted to go back.
How were you treated at the games themselves? Because it appeared, watching on television and seeing the video, that the Canadian contingent was much more boisterous than the Muscovites in the stands at games 5 through 8.
We were, but I also found that it was their culture to be quiet because they didn't want to make a fuss. It just wasn't. It just wasn't in their makeup, and I think if they had, it was really frowned on. And they were kind. They were always kind to us. So I don't know. I got like Alan Eagleson. He wasn't so nice.
That's a genuine consensus. But the Russian rooters in the stands generally were okay with you rooting for the visiting team.
They were. They were kind people. I don't care what anybody said. They were always kind to me. Even the police. I met the chief of police at one game, and he just dragged me out of the crowd. I was surprised. I thought, how would he know it's me? I had met his son that afternoon. He was an Olympic swimmer. I think it was in Munich that year. It was the tragic the tragic Olympic Games where the Israeli, um, I should say players, but the Israeli athletes were assassinated, I guess.
Right.
So he was part of that. So he came over and talked to us, and that night I got dragged out of the crowd to this big, massive. I didn't know he was a policeman. He could have been a general in the army, and I got dragged over, and he said that his name. He was Jan's father. You met my son Jan, who was in the Olympics. He was oh. So he presented me with a little doll, one of those little dolls that come apart, and gave me some ice cream and a program. And he was just the nicest man. And I thought, how would he know me? I still couldn't figure that out. But then I realized I was wearing a bright orange head ski jacket with a yellow lining. So I guess he would have just said she wears the orange jacket. I don't know. I always found that amazing that they pulled me out of the crowd.
But when they pulled you out of the crowd, your thoughts had to be going other places than, I'm going to get an ice cream and a toy.
No, yeah, I was like, oh my God, what now? Because we were always reprimanded. Like you had to walk within certain lines, and if you didn't, they didn't like that. There was just little quirky things they did. So I thought, oh no, now what have I done? But usually they were very kind to me. So, and plus I was only 21. It's kind of young.
You had alluded to the conversation that Ken Dryden, the Team Canada goalie, had with you, explaining that they were feeding off the energy of the fans in the stands. And other players also have said over the years that they heard you and they saw you and it meant a lot to them. Were you aware at the time that you were kind of the seventh man? You were the part of the game and that you were actually an inspiration for your countrymen on the ice?
Yes, we were, because a few of the players had said that if you're louder than the Russians, it pumps us up and we get energy from that. So we were, um, sorry, we were doing that every game for them. We wanted to win and we wanted to show them how much we cared about them. So we screamed as loud as we could.
Now, you have a story, I understand, about going to practice before game 8.
Yes. We got to the arena. I think there was a bunch of us at the hotel that decided we would go to see the last practice. And there was a Muscovite who said, "Oh, I'll give you guys a ride for $1." Oh, great. So he took us. I got into the arena and got separated from everybody. And I was walking around, and this man came up to me. He said he was a reporter and that I should get him a hockey stick or else he would kick me out. What? And he said, yeah. So he followed me, and I was like really nervous. I thought, how am I going to get him a hockey stick? I can't even get me a hockey stick. And he was going, you get a hockey stick, and he kept coming out and going, I'm right here. You better go do it. So I got scared. I thought, what's he going to do to me? So all of a sudden there was a big commotion at one of the doors, and I looked, and Phil Esposito is very angry, and he wants it in the arena. Finally, he barges in, and I go right now, Phil, this guy's going to throw me out. And I was pleading with him, and he went, who? And the guy just shrank, and he said, you're not throwing anybody out. And he told the people at the door, don't you do anything with her. You make her, she gets to stay. And so they went, sure, okay, you can stay. And then he let everybody in. So thank you, Bill. I always wanted to thank him.
Boy, he arrived in the nick of time.
He is my hero, and he's, yeah, nice guy too.
Now, late in the third period of game 8, there's a commotion at the benches.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what was going on at the time? Did you have any idea? You saw Alan Eagleson getting escorted across the ice. Did
That
you
was
and the
in
Canadian fans have any idea what was going on?
Well, we could see it from where we were sitting. It was in our sight line. And we just thought, oh my God, that's bad. So Alan Eagleson was very important to the players. So they weren't going to let him go easily. And I thought that was good because I thought he's got to stay. So they got him free. I thought there was no way. I thought he's going to get put in jail. We'll never see him for ages. But they got him free, so he got to watch the rest of the game.
We're going to show that clip now.
Okay.
Next up on the far side, the Canadian team are mixing it up with the spectators, and I believe Alan Eagleson is in on it over there as far as we can tell. And the Canadian team are all over there. Apparently, the police were trying to throw Eagleson out, and that's when the reserves from the Canadian team came over there to help out.
So, Kathy, you don't think that they were contacting Eagleson to give him an ice cream and a doll?
Who knows? It could have been.
Probably not, though.
No, probably not. They didn't look too happy.
And then late in the game, of course, the Soviets were leading 5-3. And the rally happens, and we're going to show that clip now, and then I'll ask you about it.
Okay.
The long pass to Phil Esposito going in. He shoots. Oh, right in front of the net. Esposito bagged that. Here's another shot by Cornwallier. He scores! Canada has tied it up. And the Cornwallier has it on that wing. Here's a shot. Henderson made a wild stab for it and fell. Here's another shot. Right in front. They score! Henderson has scored for Canada. Henderson right in front of the net. And the fans of the team are going wild. Henderson right in front of the focus goal with 34 seconds left in the game. Tried and played it back to the goal. 2 seconds. The game is over. And Canada have won the series. They defeated the Soviets 6-5.
Boy, I bet that takes you back.
Feels like it was yesterday. Plus, we were told, like whispers through the crowd, if we want to be really quiet and shuffle out slowly, don't make a big deal about it, because they didn't know it was going to happen. So there was a bit of fear within all of us that we better be careful, we better not flaunt it too much. But we were all happy. I know I was.
Everyone else couldn't see, but I could, that while you were watching that clip, you actually had your hands up to your mouth. Was there a rush of emotion seeing that?
Even now, I'm going to cry. I was so happy and proud of Canada because it was questionable through the whole series if we were going to win, if we were good enough. Because when we started the series, we just thought, oh, they're terrible. Our players are so superior. And then we found out, we're going to have to fight for this. And we did right to the end. So it was even to the end.
What was the party like after Game 8?
I don't know. I think we all just went back to the hotel and it was quiet. Yeah, I think it was quiet. I think we were all tired.
Yeah, it had to be draining just to watch that.
Yes, but we were so happy. We were so in love with our team.
And on the trip home, that had to be a happy flight, or were you all still just exhausted?
I can't really remember. We were on these Aeroflot jets, and I remember they took the floor out, and a mechanic went down the steps, and I was like, oh my, this doesn't look good. Oh my God, are we going to get home? So that was kind of iffy right there. I've never seen anything like that. And to begin the flight with, the flight attendants had plates of candy, and they passed them to each passenger. And one man beside me took two and she slapped his hand. So it was a bit of comedy relief there.
And in the years since, you've had a couple of employers who have been involved with hockey. Tell me about that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've worked for the Vancouver Canucks, and the coaches were Pat Quinn and Brian Burke, and I worked for the Olympics. So my boss is there with the great, oh my goodness, I'm not thinking of their names, but it was Dan Doyle and John Furlong, the best people to work for and the kindest men, and encouraging, kind, and Dan Doyle it was John Furlong was really rooting for the sledge hockey. That was his baby. And he kept saying, the sledge hockey, I don't think he'd ever seen that before. And then when he saw it and what the players had to contribute, he was awestruck and so proud of them that they did what they had to. And they were all disabled. It was something else.
Those four famous names you mentioned, did they ask you about 72?
Yes, I believe they did. Pat Quinn. Oh, Pat Quinn. What a man. Pat Quinn. I think he's such a kind man. And Brian Burke and Dan Doyle and John Furlong weren't really involved in hockey that much, but sorry, I'm not making much sense. I'm going back in my heart and thinking this is almost overwhelming. The feelings I'm getting from thinking about all of this and watching these highlights.
Well, I just think it's so special that these famous people, they were asking you an experience you had, and you could tell them about a famous hockey experience that you got to experience and tell them. I think that's neat.
And I remember even Igor Larionov played for the Vancouver Canucks, and I did talk to him for a while about it. And what a nice man. We had a few Russian players that came to the Canucks from Russia, of course. And really, really nice man.
When you talked to them, what was your impression of, as Russians, how they recalled the series or what it meant to them?
I think it meant a lot. It meant a lot on both sides, and I think too they don't want to be rude or be insulting. They spoke highly of everyone. Yeah. Sorry, I'm lost for words right now, but it was all very respectful.
Kathy, it has meant a lot to us that, number one, that you waited until we could get you on, your patience, and also recounting these memories that it's clear still mean so much to you all these years later. And I want to thank you so much for sharing those with us. It meant a lot to us as well to hear directly from someone who was there. Thank you, Kathy.
It was the best time of my life when I think back. I'll never
forget it. Then I'm glad we got to talk about it.
Thank you, Glenn, for having me on.
Kathy, you were wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You as well.
Okay, that is Kathy St. Germain, who really added to our program. And now, at long last, the patient Sean Mitten, who we never got to finish our conversation with. Sean, thank you for hanging out with us and not leaving and taking a better offer somewhere. We have a lot still to get to, so thank you for your patience.
Glenn, that was fun. I mean, I love just being a fly on the wall, listening to the stories, and you asked great questions. It was just a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate that very much. Now we'll get back and pick up where we left off. And one question I wanted to ask you last time we had you on, and I didn't, so I'm going to ask now was, so there were 72 stories in the original book, but I know you did more than 72 interviews. So do you recall what was number 73? What was the one that you wish could have made the cut, but it didn't quite?
Well, that's a good question. As I was going through the process, there was stories that were kind of common. I watched the game in the school, but there wasn't anything too buzzworthy about it, if you will. And then there were some stories that were right away, this is book worthy. This is going to be one of the top 72. And the challenge was, even as we got close to finalizing the book and the design and all those things, there were still stories that were coming in. And so one of the nice things about doing an update for the 50th is that we'll be able to add a few more stories. But one thing I can kind of give a little bit of a teaser, if you will, is we're going to do a little bit of update about some of the things that were happening in Canada as well, from a nostalgic standpoint. And one of those stories that was really fascinating was, and going back to the discussion about baseball, the Montreal Expos had the first no-hitter outside of the United States. I think it was like the day before the Paul Henderson goal. And that no-hitter was by a gentleman named Bill Stoneman, who I interviewed. And I really enjoyed talking to him about his memories about the no-hitter, but also about his relationship with hockey and specifically about the Montreal Canadiens players. And so, at that time, it was almost, the press, we got to get the book done. And I just couldn't kind of get it into the book at that point, but it was a memorable story. And I really enjoyed talking to Bill as both, a baseball fan myself and hearing his experiences of really the first no-hitter outside of the United States.
The original book launch was at the Hockey Hall of Fame. And apparently there's something tied into team chemistry that you remember about the book launch. Tell us.
Yeah, one of the interesting things was part of what I wanted to do with the book was really give a collective experience, but also, give some context about other things that were happening. And one of the people who was invited to be a part of the panel that the 40th anniversary evening at the Hall of Fame was Moses Znaimer. And for those people who know Moses' name, he's the founder of City TV, which has done tremendously well in Canada. And the story there was basically the launch of City TV was the day of the Game 8 in Canada. So if you can imagine putting all this work together and getting a station launched, and then this once-in-a-lifetime game comes and nobody comes to your station, if you will, to me, that's just an incredible story. And of course, he certainly had a lot of success. And I think one of the things that I wanted to do with the speakers panel was just to have different perspectives, and certainly Moses would have that. And, one of the things that we did the night before was, and for people, especially in the Hockey Time Machine community, Mike Wilson, who's the ultimate Leaf fan, he was kind enough to invite a number of us over for, the night before the speakers panel. So we had Bob Cole there. We had, Paul Patska was there, Steve Dowling, the ref from Game 2, Jim Herter, Scott Wraithby. And so the nice thing about it was we got to bond and got to know each other's stories and build a friendship. And, Moses wasn't able to make it that night, which is fine. And then the next day, of course, we're at the Hall of Fame. And, and he's seeing all this hockey stuff and all these hockey guys. And I think he felt a little bit overwhelmed. And he just said, just before we're about to go on, it's like, I can't do this. And so he had one of his people come up and said, Moses, won't be at the panel tonight. And I don't fault him at all. And I think looking back, one of the things that really occurs to me is when you think about hockey and team sports and even, business for that matter is, chemistry matters. And so, I probably, if I did it again, I wouldn't have selected Moses as part of that panel, although I think he would have had some really great stories. But just from a comfort level, he didn't feel comfortable because he wasn't a hockey guy, even though he had a great story. And I think ultimately because we all bonded together at Mike Wilson's house the night before, we just had such a much better program, and I think we all kind of fed off each other. So I often think about back to that scenario and how chemistry is so important. And certainly Team 72, they had the chemistry by bonding, even including the games in Sweden before they went to Moscow. So those are things I think about when I think about the word chemistry.
You also had a chance to get in touch with fans like Kathy, who had been able to make the transcontinental journey and watch the games in Moscow. How much did that affect you? And what was your takeaway from hearing from people like Kathy who had actually been there and had firsthand accounts?
I love talking to people who went to Moscow, because the first thing I think about is what bravery and what courage they had to go to, a country during the Cold War, a communist country that, to be honest, they didn't really have a tourism bureau. This was not a regular thing. And to have 3,000 Canadians and these people like Kathy to decide, I want to go over and support my team and have this incredible experience. In my eyes, you really had 3,000 very unique people. And there's no question, in talking to some of the players in the team, whether it was, I talked to Henderson or Espo or Cornway, they basically, they were very much aware of the crowd and how they could lift their spirits. Even after Game 5, when they lost that really tough game where they were ahead, the 3,000 crowd were basically singing the Canadian anthem as they left the ice, and that really meant a lot to them. So, during that time in Moscow, they mingled with the 3,000. They cheered, they supported, and even Ken Dryden's comment to Kathy about cheering louder. I mean, those are wonderful things to hear, and I think you could really see Canadian pride happen in that series in 1972. And I'm not sure, if you look back in time, other periods or events that would have expressed the Canadian nationalism like 72.
And really, for many, many reasons, many factors, it won't be duplicated.
No, it'll never be duplicated. And just whether it was the context of what was happening in 1972, the series, even going back to expectations. I mean, everybody thought this would be a blowout, and then all of a sudden we're fighting for our lives in the last minute of the series to win it. So, I mean, those things are hard to replicate. When I interviewed back earlier about Don Cherry, about his memories of it, he said, this will never happen again. Bob Cole, who's he was the CBC radio commentator at that time, and asked him how he felt about it, and he said, I've done a lot of games over the years, and that was the best experience that I've ever had. And that's him as a radio guy. So it's just such a unique experience, and what they experienced going over there. And Glenn, the other thing that I think is astounding is you and I can talk about being at the Legends hockey game about a month ago and trying to remember all the things that happened. We may forget some stuff, but these people are talking with very clear memories about things that happened almost 50 years ago. I'm astounded that Kathy remembers somebody grabbing candy in the airplane and the stewardess slapping a hand. I mean, that level of detail of something 50 years ago, I love talking to those people because you can see the memories and the emotion.
Sean, since your updated book and your new book on the 72 series are geared more toward a Soviet perspective, let me play a clip for you from a previous Hockey Time Machine to hear how the Russian players viewed the upcoming Summit Series, and then I'll get your reaction to it.
Sure.
Ответить на ваш первый вопрос насчет боязни. Скажу откровенно, во всяком случае, то, что я чувствовал перед этой первой игрой особенно, конечно, такой боязни не было. Было волнение. Волнение, да, было большое, потому что первый раз играли со сборной Канады, профессиональными хоккеистами. Мало видели, тем более при таком большом количестве зрителей. Мы, надо сказать, немного матчей проводили.
Not fear, but nervousness, because scouting reports were not what they are now. Everybody has video of everybody else. There are no secrets anymore, but everything was pretty much a mystery back then.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the first 5 to 10 minutes of game one in Montreal were very significant. To your point, they had a little bit of scouting of the Canadian team. They had watched, they had watched tape of some of the NHL games. They were allowed scouts to do some pre-scouting before the series, and then even the practices they were allowed to watch them. But until they got up, next to them to play them one-on-one, there was a big kind of almost a culture shock, because the other side of it is just the fans in the Montreal Forum. And, in some ways it might have been a blessing for the Russians that they had 2 goals scored on them fairly quickly in the game. They realized what they were up against, but it in some ways got some of the nerves out of the way. And I think on the flip side, for Team Canada, that was almost a little bit dangerous, because they had this sense that they could take over some of the scores that were expected, whether they'd win 8-0 or something of that nature. All of a sudden they thought, well, these expectations are coming true. And then all of a sudden the Russians got their legs and the confidence, and the series changed. So, it's great to hear stories like Yakushev about the nervousness. It wasn't fear. But once they got their sea legs, then the series changed. Then, every game was wonderful.
We also asked Brad Park, a member of Team Canada, how things would have been different had the Soviets come out on top in the 72 Summit Series. I'll play that for you and then get your reaction.
I can almost say if the Soviets had won, right? Canadians, the NHL, everything else would have put a challenge out for the next year. Mm-hmm. And with the knowledge that, this ain't over, right? But, but the other thing, when you look at it, that we did win, right? The NHL and the Canadians, they were hiding from ever doing that again, because we won. And it wasn't until 76 when they started the Canada Cups, but now it became a bunch of nations, right? But you'll never see another 8-game series, with the nationalistic approach as you did in that series. I mean, in any other sport, you would have to America against Iran, to do something like that, but that's not going to happen. But at that time in history, and the 2 different cultures and the world dynamics, it was, it's NBC or whatever, they called it a war on it. To a certain extent it was.
Sean, it can't happen again. And I think another one of the reasons is because now you have so many Russian players starring for Canadian teams. If the Lightning's Andrei Vasilevsky goes to play goal for Team Russia, there's going to be a lot of people in Tampa rooting for him.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about how that series changed, over time. And that's one of the things we want to look at in the next book is a little bit more of a reflectionary view into it. Because, there's a lot of young kids who cheer for Vasilevsky or Svechnikov or Kucherov, and they don't even really know the history and the backstory about 72. It'll never be the same. A series can never be like that again, an 8-game series. And, you think about just on conditioning and preparation and stylistic points. It was, we were treated to just an unbelievable series. And that's why we're still talking about it today. But that Brad Park interview in general was just fantastic. He had so many great insights, and he was such a great part of that series for Team Canada.
One last clip to play. You talk about legacy from the Russian perspective. and I want you to speak on this. The Russians felt like they were playing to prove a point, and as this clip will show, they feel like they succeeded.
В истории встречались две хоккейные великие державы того времени. Были самые сильные игроки канадского и советского хоккея, и каждая команда хотела доказать, что она сильнее в тот момент. И когда Александр Сергеевич говорил, что они думали, что они нас закидают палками, то они глубоко ошибались. И мы дали это урок. Вот и все.
Я скажу, что да, действительно, эти матчи, в принципе, никто не проиграл, потому что все выиграли. Если бы, потому что, смотрите, уже 49 лет прошло, а мы говорим о них. На следующий год будет вообще 50 лет. Я думаю, все команды, и наши Советского Союза игроки, и команды канадцев, которые были, они все герои, потому что они показали такой хоккей. Действительно, разный был, различный хоккей. У нас более техничный, кондиционный хоккей, дисциплинированный. У канадцев более азартный такой, немножко нагловатый, грубый, больше нацеленный на бросок, у нас больше пас. И вот эти две тактики хоккея, они соединились, и сегодня, посмотрите, в НХЛ уже играет больше в европейский хоккей, с приходом европейских звезд. И мы открыли окно практически, прорубили окно. После наших этих игр появились уже хоккеисты из Чехословакии, и других стран, Швеции, Финляндии, которых никогда бы не приглашали, а здесь сразу каскад лучших хоккеистов поехала, потому что Канада увидела, что есть хоккей не только в Канаде, в Северной Америке, но есть и в Европе. Вот, поэтому эти игры, конечно, правильно Борис Петрович сказал, что они незаменимы, они исторические. Поэтому мы сегодня и говорим, и сегодня в этой студии. И мы, наверное, сколько будет жить хоккей, мы все время будем вспоминать этот матч. Все время. И канадцы будут вспоминать, и, значит, у наших болельщики будут вспоминать российские, советские. Почему? Потому что это действительно было украшение в спорте, и это была действительно потрясающая игра.
Vladislav Tretiak, a true hockey ambassador, says, Sean, as long as hockey is played, this series will be remembered. And it seems like that's true.
Oh, no question, no question. I mean, those were three of the big giants for Moscow back then, and you know, I'm so glad they're still around to share their stories. And you know, over the years, certainly perspectives have changed and reflection as well. But you know, Moscow or Russia just had their 75th anniversary for hockey, and so you know, when you think about it, their hockey history has not been near as long as Canada's. And in fact, in 1972, they were, you know, 25 years into it, if you will. So, you know, when you think about, that was a huge turning point for them, where for a lot of Russians or Muscovites, if you will, that they knew about the NHL, but they didn't really know, they hadn't seen them live and hadn't seen their guys play against them. So that was a big eye opener for them to see, you know, the Phil Espositos, the Yvonne Cornways, the Hendersons, to see the level of play, maybe the different style of play, and they may not have agreed with it, but that their guys could compete right till the very end. And that gave them a lot of confidence and really validation. And I'm sure that really helped them in the overall Russian hockey history, that they were right on par with the NHL back in 72, you know, 25 years into their now 75-year history.
To close, I'm going to put up a link that people can go to learn more about the two books that we've been discussing. And Sean, let me give you one more opportunity to tell us about these books, when we can see them, how we can get them, all the good stuff, just to let people know who maybe want to know more after hearing you speak about it.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to the two guys that I'm working with, and it's been a lot of fun. Paul Pascal, who everybody knows, and the ultimate hockey historian. I mean, he's been unbelievable in sourcing a lot of different material from the 72 series, which helps you know, make my job and all of ours as a team work together. And the second gentleman, Alex Braverman, who's originally from Russia, and he lives in Florida, and he's been wonderful in helping, you know, secure interviews with Russian players, you know, like Tretiak as an example. And so the three of us are really working hard to, you know, provide some good stories for the second book again, which will have a little bit more of a Russian balance and more of a Russian perspective, and not just about the series, but about Russian hockey culture and the reflection over the 50 years. The first book, The Goal That United Canada, will be updated with some new stories. I'm really excited about some of the stories that are going to be added to that. And that side's a little bit more about the collective memory for Canada as well. And one of my hopes is that, we'll have the younger generations ask questions to their parents or grandparents about the series, about where they were, about why it was important to them. And, when I first did the project, I'd never asked my mom that question about, what was her memory during the Henderson goal. And I found those answers, and I'm really hoping that other people will do the same thing, and it becomes a national conversation. And like Tretiak and even Paul Henderson says, is, we want these stories to be shared with the future generations, so they understand, how important this was, but also, the nuances and the storytelling, like people like Randy Gregg and Kathy St. Germain, and the great experiences that they had.
Sean, we appreciate your expertise. We thank you so much for taking the time and again being patient with us. And we wait with great anticipation for this pair of books that I know will shine new light and bring a smile to people, those who were around in 72 and those who are learning about it for the first time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your insights with us.
Thanks, Glenn. Always great to get with you. Thanks.
Very good. That'll do it for this edition of Hockey Time Machine. For Laura Evans and Paul Patsku, I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you next time on Hockey Time Machine. Good night.